In an episode of the Within Reason podcast, a deep discussion unfolded about the ancient biblical stories, particularly focusing on the exodus of the Israelites. The conversation, led by Alex O'Connor, involved Cliff and his son Stuart. They dove into a complex topic: the destruction of the people of Ai and Jericho by the Israelites. Alex seemed to struggle with understanding the rationale behind God's actions during this time. Specifically, he questioned the morality of the mass killings and destruction that took place, especially with regard to the people of Ai and Jericho. But there's a critical point Alex seems to miss. The surrounding nations had heard about the power and might of the God of Israel. These reports had spread far and wide, from the destruction of Egypt to the many nations that had already been defeated by the Israelites. God's mighty hand was well known. Among many of these nations had heard about how the Israelites had successfully crossed the Red Sea, escaped Egypt, and conquered various nations. These reports weren't limited to rumors. They were widespread accounts of the Israelites' divine victories. This should raise an important question. Did these people not know about God's mighty power? Did they not have warnings about the God of Israel, who had destroyed other nations that opposed him? A warning is meant to signal a chance to change, to leave, or to repent. So, the people of Jericho and Ai, like the Egyptians, had heard these warnings. The Israelites were not merely passing through. This was their land, promised to them by God. In this context, these nations had the opportunity to repent or leave, but they chose not to. Alex, however, seems to focus only on their innocence, without considering the context of the warnings and the history of judgment that had already unfolded.
Like what kind of instruction had these people been given? Like the people of Ai, the people of Jericho, the Canaanites. I mean, did they have Jewish prophets coming to them and saying, you should repent of your ways, or were they just sort of expected to work it out on their own?
Fascinating question. I'm not sure. I do not know. Obviously, they have consciences. We all have consciences.
Yeah.
Alex implies that the people of these nations were innocent, but that argument misses several key factors. Innocence doesn't mean ignorance or exemption from judgment. These nations were not unaware. They had heard of the power of the Israelites' God, and despite these warnings, they chose to continue their wicked practices, such as incest, idol worship, and perverse relations. They ignored the warnings and continued with their sinful behavior, which ultimately led to their destruction. If Alex insists on blaming God for these judgments, he overlooks a crucial point. God's judgment is always just and calculated. The people of Jericho and Ai were not without warning. They had ample time and opportunity to change their ways, but they chose not to. Judgment, in this case, was not arbitrary. It was a response to their willful disobedience. The mixed multitude, evidence of widespread knowledge. In Exodus 12:38, we learn that a mixed multitude joined the Israelites in their journey toward the Promised Land. This mixed multitude was made up of people from various nations who had heard about the miracles of the God of Israel and the Israelites' exodus from Egypt. This shows that the nations around Israel were aware of what was happening and chose to respond in different ways. Some joined the Israelites, recognizing the truth of their God, while others chose to remain in their rebellious ways, continuing their idolatry and sin. The role of prophets in warning nations. In the case of Nineveh, the prophet Jonah was sent to warn the Assyrians of their impending destruction if they did not change their ways. Similarly, the people of Jericho had every opportunity to change, but they did not heed God's warning. God's justice. Israel's punishment as a warning. It's also important to note that Israel was not exempt from punishment. In Joshua 7:5-15, we read about the punishment of Achan, a man who stole from the spoils of war and violated God's command. This act brought God's judgment upon Israel, resulting in the defeat of the Israelites at Ai. God used this incident to show that he would not tolerate disobedience, even among his chosen people. Achan's sin led to the death of him and his family as an example of God's justice.